So I just wanted to take a second, probably be several minutes, to talk about a topic that comes up quite frequently, which is the topic of combatives, self-defense, and martial arts. And a lot of people equate the two or three as a thing, and in reality, they're all three subsets of a total. And I would call all three of them together martial craft or warcraft, not to steal a name. But, they are basically the art of fighting. There is a term out there called hoplology. Hoplology really is kind of everything. But most people aren't familiar with that, so I just say martial craft. At the end of the day, self-defense should be strictly about preservation of yourself. It is not about morality, spirituality, community, cultural development, or any of those things. It is strictly about preservation of self. And or, a loved one or a friend or somebody in need. Strictly about removing threat or removing yourself from the threat. With a reasonable amount of force. That's a summary of self-defense, and you can use kind of any means to get there. When you talk about combatives is essentially the same thing, the exception being that it's generally about military, law enforcement, things of that sort, where there's a lot more weaponry involved, a lot more gear, a lot more expectation of violence, and actually a lot of times the threat is more or less known. Self-defense, the threat is unknown. It could be anything that equates to a potential to face violence. That can be a mugging, or that can be sexual violence, that can be predatory in nature. And when you're talking about combatives is kind of the behavior, mechanics, etc., that deal with war, essentially, or things of that sort. And then when you get into martial arts is a bigger spectrum. So martial arts includes components of combatives and includes components of self-defense if it's done well. But it also carries a whole bunch of other stuff with it. It is a lifestyle for most people that participate. I would say the average participant, they might quit after a year, but the majority of people are going to go 3, 4, 5 years. And the purpose is bigger than just personal protection. That is a component of it, and a lot of people start martial arts journeys thinking only about personal preservation, only to realize after the fact that there's all this other stuff that doesn't really necessarily apply. The way that you can more easily break it down is martial arts. If martial arts were the total of 100%, then combatives and self-defense try to deal with the 20% of that total material. Martial arts has spiritual components, community components, cultural components, traditional components, psychological and emotional, and fitness, sport, whatever. So there's a lot of variability to it, and it's a broader spectrum piece. Self-defense, generally speaking, is going to be what gets you home at night, period. It has to do with knowing laws in your state. It has to do with knowing what reasonable force is. It has to do with knowing when you switch from attacking or preventing to attacking. And it has to do with improvised weapons. It has to do with everyday carry weapons like pistols and knives. You don't have to use those things. You just have to know, that's part of the spectrum of self-defense. It also has to do with soft skills like environmental awareness, situational awareness, threat awareness, threat assessment, risk assessment, depending on who's talking. There's different kinds of terminologies in the industry. I try to keep all that pretty simple and pretty focused, but there are things along self-defense study that are also going to involve physical components as well. You have to know how to prevent. That's probably 75% to me of self-defense, is all the stuff that keeps you from having to deal with anything. And that comes down a lot of times just to the awareness processes. But there's also this component of self-evaluation and self-evaluation. Like, what are you willing to do to survive, and what do you think you're willing to do to survive versus what you're willing, and then what are you worth? Because once you decide what you're worth, it becomes a lot more apparent how far you're going to be willing to go to protect yourself. And you have all kinds of cultural things that can get in the way of that. So part of self-defense is sorting through that, figuring out what it is that you have as blockages that would keep you from potentially coming home at night. And there is work involved, but generally speaking, there's the prevention side, there's the pre-contact side, which tells you that something is imminent and it's going to happen. And then there's de-escalation and all components. There's a bunch of different components in there. And then you have the contact phase. And the contact phase is going to be like, this is what you're doing, this is how you're doing it, this is a way to sort of survive. And that's typically more physical in nature. And basically that's what the Guerrilla Sea-Lot hand courses, the disruptor course, and enforcer courses. And then you have post-phase, which is like, how do I deal? Do I triage myself? Do I triage others? How do I notify police? What can I expect from myself? If I have received a concussion, should I really be making a statement to the police? Should I contact a lawyer or not contact a lawyer? What can I expect for legal ramifications for the things that I've done? So there's a ton to it, even though at the end of the day, the physical curriculums are generally pretty small in a good self-defense course. The longer you pursue them, the more you can learn, but in reality, it's not the physical stuff that's super critical. It's more of the what I would call soft skills, learning how to prevent, how to de-escalate, how to avoid escape and evasion as a thing. And then what to do after. How do you deal with it after? How do you deal with yourself after you've hurt somebody? Can you deal with it? So these are all things that are part of self-defense that are not necessarily part of a martial arts curriculum, or they might be part of it, but they're generally spread out over so much time that you don't really. I won't say you won't pay attention to them, but they're not compressed, right? So the other factor to self-defense and combatives that's different than martial arts is martial arts. Like I said, I would expect my average person that I train sticks with me 3 to 5 years. Most of the guys I got they stay with me longer. So I have all that time to teach people value. When you're talking about self-defense and combatives, generally speaking, you don't have much time. So if I want to provide you opportunity to learn skills today that you can apply today, then I have to keep it simple, and I have to keep it direct, and I have to keep it on point, and that includes all of these other skills, these soft skills. And so self-defense and combatives in general tend to be shorter curriculum programs, right? We focus mostly on what is probable versus what is possible. Martial arts, generally speaking, from a physical standpoint, will include a lot that is possible but is not probable. Combatives, you don't have time for that. If you're going to send somebody off to war, for example, think boot camp, right? Most boot camps in the U.S. are about 8 weeks. So just register that for a second. If a boot camp is 8 weeks long and you're going to send somebody out with a rifle to defend themselves against other people shooting back, you can expect roughly that it's going to be a kind of similar equivalent of time. Now that's 24 hours a day or 7 days a week, not technically 24 hours because you sleep. But in 8 weeks' time, you can train a soldier. And then give them their specialty in another 8 or 10 or 12 or 16 weeks. So, if that's the case for people who are guaranteed to end up in a combative situation, then, martial arts is taking 2, 3, 4, 5 years, 6 years, 10 years, 20 years. And then you have self-defense is also going to be a very short time period if it's focused well, and and it's got hierarchies, right? Like I generally am going to start with people standing up. There comes a point at which they're going to have to deal with weapons. There's going to be a point at which they're going to have to understand how to get up from the ground, how to keep somebody off of them, and so those are kinds of the main differences. When you get into martial arts, again, you have this sports component, you have this fitness component, and let me just tell you, in combatives, you generally have a fitness component. In self-defense, you generally have a fitness component. Now, people will argue about the value, but at the end of the day, let me just tell you, if I was equally skilled and equally trained, whatever, with another person of the same size, same weight, same ability, but my fitness level was higher, I would generally have a greater chance of winning. So, all things being equal, fitness plays a role, and you can deny it if you want to, but in reality, it does play a role. Is it the most significant role? No, it isn't, but it is a factor, and factors are anything that increases your. I mean, if I can do anything to get myself home at night safer or quicker or healthier, why would I not do that? So fitness plays a role in combatives, it plays a role in self-defense, it plays a role in martial arts, but sports doesn't. Sports pretty much is just martial arts. And, so when you get a place that's like, oh, we teach self-defense, and then they teach, different kinds of sport arts, like MMA or something, maybe they teach self-defense, but that in itself is not self-defense. That is a sport, and it's okay, and it's good, and hell, I watch it all the time. I love it. But it is not self-defense. It is not personal protection. Now, when you get involved with combative styles, so like Krav Maga, everybody's heard of it probably, but I would say that originally Krav started off as a combative style and has mutated somewhat into be a little bit more of a self-defense style, but it still has its components of combatives, and so once again, it's a good system. There's nothing wrong with it. Just understand what the placements are for these things. They serve different things, and they are not the same. Self-defense is going to, generally speaking, be fairly simple, easy to maintain. It's going to focus a lot more on mental skills and awareness and things like that. All of which is valid as a martial artist, all of which is valid as a combatives person, but it'll be highlighted and trained the most in probably self-defense and combatives, because both of those require pretty quickly that you figure out how to keep yourself alive more than anything. And so that is like kind of a breakdown. It's a little bit babbly, sorry about that, but sorting through it on video is a little bit different for me. But I thought that would be easier than trying to write it out. Obviously, if you have questions, ask them below. I'm going to post this on the Gorilla Sealot Facebook page. If you have questions, man, shoot them out. You can DM me. I don't really care. At the end of the day, we're running this program to teach people to be safer today than they were yesterday. And so I want to do everything I can to make that happen. I take what I teach as being a direct. If I had to teach my kids things to do to keep themselves safe, this is what I would teach them. And in fact, you can ask them. I've been teaching them a lot of soft skills ever since they would listen to me. So those things you can't get enough of, and they can repeat them back to me now, which is awesome. Hopefully they're taking it to heart, because actually all of my girls are pretty much at the peak ages of danger right now, between 16 and 28. 16 and 19 are the highest, particularly for like date sexual assaults and things like that. But then even up until age 24 is quite high for sexual assault and rape and violence of that sort, and then all the way up to 28-ish. It does depend regionally and all that stuff. But anyway, so they're at high risk territory, so I hope they heed my words and listen to them. But this is material that I would teach them. If I wouldn't teach them, I won't teach you, basically. So if you are interested in any of it, let me know. Give me a shout. DM me right down below. It's all good. Thank you. Take care.